The political and economic agenda has changed in general on the continent, and I think that's probably a good sign for the future. Harish Natarajan, AKE International. Well, Venezuela is in the middle of its worst crisis in living memory, as the nation continues to battle rampant inflation rates, crippling shortages, and an economy projected to plummet by 10% just this year. How then do you think Venezuela can look to try and drive export growth?
Despite the devaluation, depreciation of the currency, the high rates of inflation have more or less negated any of the positive effects which would otherwise occur. So while we may, for instance, hope that a lower price of the bolivar would be able to stimulate exports, that really won't be happening. And secondly, one of the fundamental problems is that given the country's general economic state, the ability to both attract investment to sectors other than the oil sector, and indeed at this point even to the oil sector, is incredibly limited. With the shortages of supplies, it seems very difficult that any sector will be able to grow. But it doesn't look likely that there will be a recovery anytime soon. So I think, in summary, absent major political and economic change, it will take quite a long time for Venezuela to recover, its export sector to recover.
Okay, well, Argentina's President Macri predicted that their economy will likely grow between 3 and 3.5% in 2017, with inflation forecasts set to cool. How do you assess Argentina's growth prospects?
Well, I think 3 and 3.5% is a little bit optimistic, but nonetheless, I think Argentina is certainly on the way to recovery. This needs to be carefully caveated, which is the Argentinian economy this year, because of lots of the reforms put in place, including the removal of, for instance, currency controls, which led to a currency devaluation in the first place and inflation in the second place, has definitely meant that this year is going to be a difficult year. We're looking at best, I think, at maybe a 1% to 1.5% contraction in the economy this year. But going forward, I think there are lots of positive signs. One of the challenges for Argentina will be whether or not the momentum when it comes to economic reform can be sustained. Intuitively, some of the difficult economic circumstances that the population is facing this year could definitely derail some of the movement which has occurred thus far. I think you can be cautiously optimistic, but certainly I think next year we will have positive growth. 3% might be a bit optimistic, but certainly more than 2%. I think Argentina will certainly be one of the bright spots in the region overall, admittedly a very challenging region at that.
And lastly, LATAM economies' global trade, in volume terms, have fallen for the third straight month, the first time this has happened since 2008. Can then you find any reasons to be positive about the LATAM situation at present?
I think there are. So what has been happening in the last couple of years, I think, are two things. The first has been the slowdown in the commodity sector, and particularly collapse of commodity prices. And the second thing which has occurred is the Brazilian economy, which has been very important to the region overall, is obviously in a very difficult position. And its recovery, if it does occur, is probably at least a year and a half away. And at best, it looks to be stabilizing at about 3% contraction. But with that said, I think there are some positive signs. The first has been there seems to be a movement away from economic populism, which was one of the more corrosive economic influences in Latin America. So the kinds of policies which you'd seen in Argentina before the Macri government came to power, which you see and definitely saw in the past in Venezuela and across the continent, seem to no longer be in vogue. So I think there seem to be some positive signs, even in countries, for instance, like Peru, which is one of the shining lights in the region overall. In Colombia, where I think, despite the slowdown in commodity prices, you've had a reasonable movement from the government, potential peace with the FARC, all of which are very positive. There certainly are reasons to be optimistic about individual countries, even not necessarily the region overall.
Okay, thank you, Harish. Be sure to check back with the Dukascopy TV team for more updates throughout the week. See you next time.